Hello. It's an honor to speak here today. Thank you very much. I've always had this calling to theatre and this dream of what theatre means, this sacred imagination space for humanity, this world of many gods, human beings, and their monsters. I don't use the word theatre to describe a place. In fact, theatre can happen anywhere, and I believe sometimes theatre can achieve most outside of theatre buildings. To me, theatre is a space and time that exists in a magical moment of collective suspended disbelief. The moments where an audience is immersed, is united, has become a subconscious tribe, collectively believing in, and more importantly, feeling a fantastical moment or a moment of fantastical reality before it disappears like a dream. In these moments, the audience will breathe together. They'll hold their breath with the performer. They'll also feel the performers, the landscape of the performer's emotion as they journey into love, death, loss, betrayal. And as a performer, you can feel the audience there with you. You can sometimes feel an individual's emotion. And it can move you as a performer in that moment of honest human connection. The performer is moved by the audience's emotional response. And what's brilliant is that the performer then reflects that back. They are changed. It becomes part of the theatre. The performer discovers something new in the play between the audience and themselves. They discover new and true feelings in a theatre they were conjuring, but which is equally being conjured simultaneously by the audience. An individual's emotion can ripple through a play in that way. And I believe the whole audience tribe can sense it, they can feel it, they can hold it. In those moments, all are one and one are all. I believe this phenomenon to be unique to theatre. I believe the more diverse the audience tribe, the more valuable the discovery of belonging. The more diverse the audience tribe, the more cathartic the experience of shared feeling. The richer the pool of experience and emotion, the more profound the impact of conscious tribal dreaming, the more magic the theatre. Theatre teaches us to see ourselves in each other and each other in ourselves, and it's powerful to be seen, to feel, to belong, especially beyond our self-perceived social and cultural borders. I realize what I'm talking about is something that's subjective, that's hard to measure. It's a phenomenon, though if you've ever felt it, I'm sure you'll know. I believe that human beings long for this sort of connection, and it hardly needs to even be mentioned that it's something that I believe that we're forgetting in a world of social networking rather than social interaction, in a world of Wi-Fi connection rather than human. Human beings are tribal animals. We've not yet evolved to be this lonely. The human connection I feel in theatre gives me the same sense of awe that I sometimes feel when I'm looking at the stars. It fills me with the same sense of wonder. Our theatre is embraced by an ever-growing audience, many who don't go to theatres. Theatre can be transforming. The magic of theatre can be thrilling, but our theatre needs to be rogue. It needs to be in the places that the audience's imaginations own. I grew up in a low-income house in Camborne, a low-income town in Cornwall, the UK's most southwesterly county, a beautiful, rugged, rural peninsula surrounded by sea. I grew up with a single mother, a brother and a sister. My mother was always ambitious, always had big dreams, and a father who we didn't see as often as we hoped. My mother was from a family of 5. She grew up in Camborne from a hard-working family, and she met my father when she was 13. My dad was one of 12. He had 5 brothers and 6 sisters, and they grew up in a 2-bedroom prefabricated bungalow in Pengegan, a housing estate on the outskirts of Camborne. My father describes how he and his dad used to hide on the roof. I don't blame him. Theatre was hardly in my genes. But somewhere between my mother's determination to show us a good life, to access the free natural resources in Cornwall, the woodlands, the beaches, the moorlands, the sacred sites, and my father's resourcefulness, his poverty-taught inventiveness, and his ability to survive, which was lucky, for adventures with my dad when we were children often involved being dangled down old mine workings and old fishing boat mooring rope. My imagination as a child was on fire, and I learned how to thrive in this rugged landscape of Cornwall. I learned that so long as you had food in your belly, even if you had no money, in Cornwall your life could be rich. Growing up, I felt like I didn't really belong. I could always see that we make decisions about who we are, and perhaps that was a gift of living between two worlds. My dad's, complete with its own set of relaxed, reckless rules, its own language complete with swear words, and sensational stories about fights, nasty accidents in mines, fishing boats, huge seas, wrecks on rocks, and murders, all told with a thick Cornish accent. And my mother's more gentle world of folklore and myth. She filled our imaginations as children with wishes, fairy tales, and witches. I can remember trying not to swear when we got back from my dad's. I remember how different the two worlds felt and how language was a huge part in defining them. My dad was a hard man. I was told that by all the men who knew him. Oh, you wouldn't mess with him. He once scat out half a rugby team. And that was true. But my dad was also always a very kind and friendly, open man. And he was never more himself than when helping someone else. As children, we witnessed him forcibly break up what he described as an attempted murder. We were petrified. And as children, we were traumatized. It wasn't until later that my mother described it as a drunken brawl he didn't really need to be involved in. I could have carried on living in a much darker world than I needed to. We're all very conscious today of the way that storytelling is used to change the way that we behave, the way we spend our money, the way we see the world, the way we see our history, the way we vote. Storytelling fascinates me. We're designed to hear and tell stories. Storytelling has aided the evolution of humankind, from the very first cave paintings depicting animals, ritual, and hunting, to the works of Shakespeare that illuminate the complex beauty of the human condition. And yet, we often forget how powerful our own stories can be, and how the language that we use to describe our lives literally defines our lives and changes our experiences and even our memories. In theatre, we have the opportunity to explore new stories. We have the opportunity to explore challenging narratives with the support of an audience tribe. Theatre can teach us new language to reframe our experiences. Theatre can give us the language to describe what we couldn't explain before. Theatre can allow us to redefine ourselves. Our stories shape us. Collectively, our stories shape the world. As a teenager, I felt disconnected. I'd thought my way into an existential crisis. Looking back, I can see how teenage minds are full of intuition and full of vision, but at the time I just felt lost. I spent my time looking for some sense of ritual, some rite of passage, some sense of connection. Instead, school taught me to try and fit in and to prepare myself for the real world. The school narrative for the real world filled me with panic, and in my imagination, the real world became this dark old void, full of fear. I had no idea of the magical wonder I'd experienced in the real world in theatre only round the corner. We're often taught to fear the unknown. We're often taught to fill that void with fear. But there are so many questions that won't be answered. And fear is a fight or flight response, which isn't useful when you can't fight the unknown, when you can't run, ultimately, from death. So isn't it far better then that we explore the unknown collectively, that we illuminate the darkest shadows of humanity confidently, that we mark our rites of passage with stories and with human connection, that we fill that dark old void with wonder and possibility? I've always had this dream of theatre. In fact, I think as a child, I dreamed of the theatre that we make now in Tahiti Woods. In the dream, I always felt like we'd end up in the wild, but at the time when we started out making theatre, I didn't feel like we had the experience necessary to face the challenges of working in a wild environment. And so for the first 6 years of making theatre, we toured nationally to venues, which was a brilliant experience. And there were some really magical experiences. However, touring to venues also highlighted one of the main disadvantages of theatre in most venues, and that is that they divide the audience at the door, either through ticket price or through social and cultural preconceptions of the types of things that go on inside those buildings and the types of people who belong there. Some theatres even divide their audiences in their auditoriums into socio-economic seating arrangements, which in my mind goes against the very magical essence of theatre. we realized that our theatre was only reaching a very tiny segment of our culture. We weren't connecting with the people that we were looking to connect with. We weren't achieving the magic of the theatre we had dreamed. In 2010, we'd created a show called The Dance from the Devil. It was a story about a refugee camp hidden in a woodland. And finally, we felt prepared to take our theatre to the woods. And so in the place where I dreamed of theatre as a child, we created our first show, and it was thrilling. Over 3 nights, we expected 300 people to come. We charged £5 a ticket on the door. Actually, 1,200 people immersed themselves in our theatre adventure into Hiddy Woods. And the most exciting thing was the diversity of the audience, was the sense of the wild, the sense of connectedness, the sense of immersion. This tribe gathered together in the darkness at the heart of the woods to experience theatre. Some of them were theatre makers, some were theatre lovers, some had never been to the theatre before, some had undoubtedly snuck in without paying. But it didn't matter because they sat on the forest floor. They leant against trees. They were bikers, they were fishermen, they were lords, they were ladies. This was theatre, and it belonged there. You could sense it. People have gathered under the trees to share stories for millennia, and you could feel it in the air. I sat on the stage at the end of the show filled with wonder. I was finally home, and yet a whole world had just opened up. Since that night, we've created 8 years of theatre into Hiddy Woods, all completely self-funded by ticket sales alone. We keep our ticket prices as low as we possibly can, £8.50, with a further discount for those who can't afford it. Some audience members say that they would pay more, and we know that some audience members can't afford to come. And so we created wildcards, where audience members who would like to pay more can invest in the theatre that we make by sponsoring somebody else, by buying a ticket, much like here at the TEDx talk, for an unknown friend. And every year, hundreds of people experience being part of our theatre at the benevolence, at the generosity of another audience member. I think if theatre is to achieve its truly magical potential, it must recognize our culture real time and embrace our culture in its current diversity. Theatre is living, breathing culture, and every member of our community, whether resident or visiting, must have a place there. If culture is to be rich and meaningful, it must define itself as transient, ever evolving, redefining itself, just like a human being. Cultural happenings must throw their doors wider, or better still, get rid of the walls. Our theatre works as hard as it possibly can to be accessible on every level. Our theatre must be accessible at least to the boy who once dreamed it. I've spoken about this dream that I had of theatre as a child. And in the dream, there was a witch dancing around a fire under the trees in front of an audience. She had a bone in her hand, and she was beckoning me up onto the stage. In the dream, I was afraid. These days, I write about witches all the time. Witchcraft fascinates me, not least because I once found a magical book on witchcraft, and on the first page, in cauldron black letters, these words: perception is reality. If reality is perceived, and the way we perceive is influenced by our imaginations, imagination influences reality. We can choose to see the magic. Our imaginations can fill our realities with dreams, and our dreams can become realities if we let them. We may argue that our dreams are silly, that the fantastical isn't real, but perhaps that's just because that's what we were taught. Perhaps we only choose to perceive the world and reality in that way. Thank you very much.